They called it a gift. Intelligence. A spark they praised, a light they fed. You're so smart, they said, as if those words were protection, as if understanding the world would make it kinder. But they never told you that once the light turns on, you see everything, even what they hide. You started to notice things others missed, how adults lied with smiles, how teachers praised obedience, not truth, how the rules bent for those who knew how to nod. You weren't better, just awake. And that awareness began to feel like a weight. At first, they applauded you for thinking differently, but soon they called it arrogance, because the world does not love those who see too much. You asked questions, they gave you silence. You pointed at cracks, they painted over them. So you started to wear a mask, not to deceive, but to survive. A smile that meant nothing. Laughter you didn't feel. Words chosen not for truth, but for acceptability. The gift became a cage. Every answer led to more questions. Every truth made the world colder. You see too much, feel too deeply, and trust too rarely. They never warned you. That intelligence is not a ladder. It's a window, and sometimes it shows you things you can never unsee. They said, you're special. But what they meant was, you'll be alone. The isolation doesn't come all at once. It creeps in, quietly, like fog rolling into a familiar town. You don't notice it at first, but suddenly nothing looks the same. At first you just feel different. You laugh at different jokes. You ask questions that make others uncomfortable. You say things, too early, too often, too deeply, and people pull back. No one says it out loud, but you feel it in the pauses, in the looks, in the soft rejection that doesn't need words. You begin to speak less, because you've learned that speaking truth makes people uncomfortable, and making people uncomfortable makes them leave. So you learn to shrink yourself, not because you want to, but because you think you have to survive, to belong, to stay invited. But belonging that costs your authenticity isn't belonging, it's performance. In time, you stop speaking altogether. You start nodding more, smiling more, agreeing more, just to keep the peace. You start becoming invisible, not physically, but emotionally. They still invite you, but they don't really see you. They hear your voice, but not your thoughts. And every time you pretend, you disappear a little more. You try to explain yourself, but your words come out wrong. Too complex, too abstract, too much. So they laugh. Or worse, they say, you think too much, as if thinking deeply is a disease to be cured. Eventually you retreat into books, into thoughts, into silence. And there, in that silence, you begin to build your world, one where your questions matter, where your depth isn't punished, where the things that scare others are welcome, but that world is yours alone. That's the cost of early intelligence. You see too much too soon, and while others are busy learning how to play, you are already learning how to endure. The mind wakes early, but the heart still wants to belong. And in that war between awareness and connection, isolation always wins. They told you intelligence would bring answers. They didn't say the answers would hurt. Awareness is not a light. It is a scalpel. It doesn't illuminate. It cuts. The smarter you get, the more you realize how broken everything is. Family, school, society, yourself. You stop idealizing your parents. You begin to see their trauma, their masks, their contradictions, the lies they had to tell themselves just to function. And you forgive them, but it doesn't make it easier to live with them, because now you understand them more than they understand themselves. Then you look at society, the injustice, the hypocrisy, the masks worn with pride. You see people punished for honesty and rewarded for performance. You see systems that serve no one except those who built them. And every time you think you've reached the bottom, you find another hidden layer, another ugly truth, and another reason to stay silent. You try to unsee. You wish you could. But once the mind sees, it does not forget. The veil has been lifted. The child has left the garden, and paradise was never real. Clarity does not give peace. It gives precision, and precision cuts deeper than confusion ever could. And in that clarity, something breaks. Not loudly, not violently, just quietly, the same way a mountain erodes, slowly, from the inside. You walk among people, but you're not really there. You listen, but you're already thinking 10 layers beneath the words. You smile, but your mind is elsewhere, somewhere deeper, somewhere colder. This is what intelligence does. It does not comfort. It exposes, and what it reveals is not always beautiful. Clarity is not freedom. It's responsibility, and sometimes it feels like punishment. When the world becomes too loud, the mind retreats, and in that retreat, it begins to build a new world, a safer world, one made of thoughts instead of voices, of ideas instead of people, of patterns instead of feelings. It feels like refuge, but it's a prison, a beautiful one made just for you. In this echo chamber, your own voice becomes the loudest. You replay conversations, reconstruct arguments, rehearse futures that never arrive. The mind spins endlessly, not because it's broken, but because it doesn't know how to stop. You begin to talk less, because you're already having conversations inside your head. But the more you stay there, the harder it becomes to come back. The real world starts to feel foreign, too slow, too chaotic, too senseless. So you retreat further until silence feels like home and people feel like noise. In time, you forget how to speak to others, how to share your inner world, how to simplify your thoughts, how to connect without over-explaining. Because everything inside you feels like too much, and everything outside you feels like not enough. Eventually, you stop trying. Not because you don't want connection, but because your mind has made itself a home that feels safer than the outside. But here's the tragedy. The longer you live in that home, the harder it is to leave it. Even when the door is wide open, you become your own echo, your own audience, your own prison. This is what the mind does. When it has nowhere else to go, it echoes, repeats, rehearses, rebuilds, until thought itself becomes the only voice you hear. Innocence doesn't die loudly. It fades, quietly, softly, like a candle left in the rain. No scream, no drama, just a slow realization that the world isn't what you were told it was. You remember when you believed in fairness, in goodness, in adults knowing what they were doing, but now you see it. The lies weren't mistakes. They were comfort, given to you like medicine, sweet on the outside, poison underneath. You start to ask, why do we lie to children? Why do we teach obedience instead of wisdom? Why do we pretend things are simple when they never are? The answer is painful, because truth breaks faster than the mind can heal. Intelligence doesn't just reveal truth, it reveals cost. The cost of seeing clearly, the cost of knowing more than others want you to. Because once you see the cracks, you can never unsee them. And the innocence that once protected you becomes a memory you can't get back. And so, you change. You speak less. You trust less. You smile only when necessary. People say you've grown distant, but they never ask why. Because they don't want to know. So you adapt. You learn to play dumb, to nod at things you don't believe, to laugh at things you don't find funny. You become an actor in your own life. And the mask? It fits too well. You forget where the acting ends and where you begin. There's a point when knowing becomes too much, not because the information is overwhelming, but because the consequences are. Once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, you can't unknow. And it starts eating at you, slowly. You see the hypocrisy in conversations, the manipulation in media, the emptiness behind smiles, the fear behind traditions. You begin to notice everything is wearing a mask, and under those masks is fear. Fear of change, fear of truth, fear of being seen. You speak up gently. You ask questions. They stare. Some smile nervously. Others change the subject. Eventually, they stop inviting you. You are not hated. You are not attacked. You are simply left behind because the truth makes people uncomfortable. And so, you become the embodiment of discomfort. You see too much, and it isolates you. But what hurts most is not that others avoid you, it's that you begin to envy them, the ignorant, the distracted, the blissfully unaware. Because knowledge doesn't bring peace, it brings weight, and the wiser you get, the lonelier it becomes. You start to wonder, was it worth it? This awareness, this clarity, this mind that sees too much, would it have been better to stay blind, to laugh more, to question less, to belong? But you already know the answer, because even in this exile, even in the silence. You wouldn't trade it back. Not for comfort, not for company, not even for peace. Because this is who you are now. A witness, a watcher, a mind that sees even when it hurts. So you start lying too. At first, you told the truth. You asked the real questions. You said what you saw, and they rejected you, silently, quietly, by smiling less, by avoiding your eyes, by inviting you less and less. So you adapted. You started learning the rules, what to say, when to stay quiet, when to nod and laugh. You studied the mask and began to wear it, not to deceive, but to survive. You start telling small lies. That's interesting. I agree. You're right. Even when you don't mean it, because you've learned something. Truth makes people flinch, but agreement makes them smile. And sometimes you just want peace. And soon, you lie more than you speak. The lie becomes second nature. The truth becomes a private thing, something you whisper only to yourself, or write down, or bury, and it becomes easier that way. Eventually, you forget which part was the lie, and which was you. The smile becomes automatic. The nods effortless. The performance perfect. You've become everything they wanted, and in the process, you've misplaced yourself. One day, you catch a glimpse of yourself, not in the mirror, but in a moment, a phrase you repeat that you don't believe, a laugh that isn't yours, a silence where your voice should have been. And it hits you. You've become one of them, not out of malice, not out of ignorance, but out of exhaustion. This was never about being fake. It was about staying safe. But in saving yourself, you started disappearing. And now, you don't know if anyone has truly met you in years. Not even you. There comes a point where you no longer know if what you're experiencing is awakening or collapse. You've seen too much, unmasked too many people, dug too deep. Now you start questioning the one thing you thought you could trust, yourself. Your thoughts become layered, recursive, looped. You think about how you think. You reflect on your reflections. You dissect your own emotions until they stop feeling like yours. And in that spiral, you begin to fear. Is this wisdom or madness? You talk to yourself more, not out loud, but inside, constantly. You replay memories. You rewrite conversations. You anticipate betrayals that haven't happened yet. And the line between fear and foresight blurs. The world says, you're too sensitive. You're overthinking. You're unstable. But you wonder, or are you just ahead? Is this madness or the cost of seeing what others refuse to? Then, one day, you stop asking. You stop needing to know whether you're sane or not, because what you've gained is not clarity, not answers, but silence. Not empty silence, but the silence that comes when you stop trying to explain yourself to a world that isn't listening. You've searched for a name, for what this is, this mind, this pain, this distance. You wondered if it was illness, or insight, if it was trauma, or transformation. But now, you no longer care. You don't need to call it anything. It just is, and so are you. Not normal, not broken, not enlightened. Just here, watching, breathing, alone but awake. And maybe that's enough. You don't get to put it down. The mind, the seeing, the weight. You don't wake up one day and find it gone. It stays, but something shifts, not in the mind, in the posture, in how you carry it. You stop fighting it. You stop resenting it. And that changes everything, because the pain doesn't leave, but it no longer defines you. It becomes part of the background, like wind, like time. You begin to choose your words more carefully, not to please others, but to protect your energy. You no longer argue to be understood. You speak only when it matters. You offer truth like a candle, not a sword, because you've learned most people aren't ready, and that's okay. You find others like you, quietly, rarely, without announcement. You recognize it in their silence, in their eyes, in how they pause before answering. And when that happens, it's enough. You still feel alone, often, but it no longer scares you, because you've built something no one can see, a home in your mind, a temple in your silence. And though the curse remains, you carry it with grace. You don't speak much anymore, not because you have nothing to say, but because most things are better left in silence. You stop trying to be understood. You stop reaching for rescue. You stop hoping to be explained. Because the ones who know don't need it, and the ones who don't never will. And strangely, that no longer hurts. You've learned to sit with the curse, to hold it gently, like a wounded bird, like a secret that only breathes in the dark. It is yours, not your enemy, not your shame, just yours. And now, for the first time, you don't want to trade it for anything. You carry the curse, but it no longer carries you. There's a power that comes from not needing to be seen, from walking into a room and listening more than speaking, from noticing everything but saying only what matters, from watching patterns long before anyone else notices they exist. You don't interrupt, you don't compete, you don't rush to prove anything, because when you carry the curse, you no longer need noise. To confirm your worth, your presence becomes its own truth. It shapes the space without trying. And eventually, people feel it. They can't name it, but they sense it in how you look at them, in how you don't flinch, in how you don't chase attention. And strangely, they begin to follow your stillness. This is power, with no crown, no title, no noise. It doesn't demand. It doesn't sell. It simply is. And in a world addicted to performance, your silence becomes revolutionary. You're not above them. You're not below them. You're just free from their games. And because you no longer need the stage, you become the one they turn to when the lights finally go out. You used to crave being heard. Now your silence speaks, and it says more than any scream ever could. You try to go back, just once, to see if you can still fit. You visit the places, say the old words, put on the old smile, and for a moment, it almost works. But something's wrong. The jokes feel empty. The silence is too loud. The question's too shallow. It's not that they've changed. It's you. You've seen too much, known too much, lost too much. And there's no pretending. You don't. You feel like a visitor in your own life, a stranger in your old skin. You speak the language, but no longer understand the rhythm. You nod at things that once excited you, but now feel hollow. And so you stop trying. You walk away, not with anger, not with sadness, but with clarity. You don't belong there anymore. You've outgrown the illusion, not because you're better, but because you've changed. And that kind of change doesn't reverse. There is no going back. And strangely, you don't want to, because forward, though quiet and uncertain, is the only direction. That feels honest. You tried to return, but the door you left through no longer exists, and you no longer fit the key. People say it's a gift, a blessing, something to be proud of. They admire your insight, quote your words, ask for your thoughts, but they don't know what it costs, what it takes to live with a mind that doesn't turn off, a heart that feels every fracture in the world, eyes that can't look away from the cracks. You were born with it, or maybe it grew from pain. Either way, you didn't ask for it. It followed you like a shadow, tethered to your spine, whispering in every silence. You tried to silence it, to drown it, to trade it, but it stayed. And in time, you stopped running, not because you made peace, but because you had no other choice. You made room for it, fed it, let it speak, and in return, it burned away every illusion you ever held. About people, about meaning, about yourself. They called it brilliance. You called it survival. They called it talent. You called it weight. They called it a gift. But deep down, you always knew. This was never a gift. It was a mirror that no one else wanted to hold. But now, after all the exile, the silence, the watching, you carry it differently. Not with pride, not with bitterness, just with understanding. And when someone asks what it's like, you only say, heavy. If you've made it this far, maybe you carry it too. The weight, the silence, the sharpness that never turns off. If so, you're not broken. You're not alone. You're not lost. You're just awake. And somewhere out here, someone else is awake with you. Quiet, watching, breathing, just like you. If this spoke to something you've never said out loud, stay, subscribe, not for content, but for reminders that you were never crazy, just awake too early. And some of us are learning how to live with that. Together, it was never a gift. It was a mirror, a burden, a fire. But now, it's just you and the weight you've learned to carry without sound.